Candidates Night for the Manhasset Union Free School District Board of Education trustees. We will begin tonight's forum with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So once again, good evening and welcome to the Candidates Night. My name is Jessica Weaver, and I represent the League of Women Voters. I am not from this district. The purpose of the League of Women Voters is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League is nonpartisan and does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Throughout its history, the League has provided opportunities for candidates seeking public office to take their case directly to the voters. We hope that you find this forum informative. In order to prepare for tonight, the candidates have agreed to 14 rules, which I will read briefly. Procedures for the virtual meetings with candidates. 1, the moderator will be a member of the League of Women Voters from outside the district. I'm from Port Washington. 2, the moderator will pull straws or flip a coin to determine the order of speaking. We flipped a coin. 3, each candidate will be allowed 3 minutes for an opening statement. 4, after all candidates have spoken, the moderator will open the meeting with questions from the audience, either submitted through the chat function or beforehand. In this case, you may email questions to lwv.qs.manhasset@gmail.com during the forum. The moderator will instruct the audience to confine each question to the issues of the campaign and to take no more than 1 minute when asking the question. The moderator will be the arbiter of whether questions are appropriate, repetitive, or abusive. Questions from the audience may be addressed to a specific individual or to the candidates in general, although all candidates will be given an opportunity to answer a question addressed to a specific individual. Each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes to answer a question. There is no rebuttal. The moderator will attempt to rotate the order of speaking for each question. A League member will act as timekeeper. 1/2 minute from the end of any given time period, the timekeeper will warn the speaker by a prearranged signal. When the time is up, the speaker will be allowed to finish the sentence. Repeatedly speaking past the deadline may result in a candidate being muted. Candidates will have 2 minutes for a closing statement and will speak in the same order as the opening statement. Since the purpose of the meeting is to determine the candidate's views, no substitute speakers will be allowed should a candidate be unable to attend. The use of props, charts, visuals, and the distribution of campaign literature is prohibited. In accordance with League policy, audio and video recording by authorized members of the media will be permitted only if agreed by all of the candidates present. The League maintains the right to record the forum. No other recording is allowed. No partial transcript or recording may be published without written permission from the League. And lastly, the League maintains the right to record the forum and make it available to the public after this event on its Facebook page and website. No other recording is allowed, and no partial transcript or recording may be aired or published without permission from the League. Those are the rules for this particular forum. Without further ado, let's begin. We flipped a coin, like I said, before the forum began, and Ms. Aitken, you will give your first opening statement.
Good evening. Thank you to the League for hosting this forum so community members can hear from the candidates and make an informed decision. I'd like to share some thoughts in 3 key areas. As a parent and community member, I first decided to run for the board because I care about our children and I knew I could make a meaningful contribution. I've been a Manhasset resident for over 22 years, and I'm the mother of 3 children who went through our excellent schools. I believe it's essential to give back to communities that have provided me and my family with life-changing opportunities. I'm proud of our district's accomplishments in academics, athletics, arts, and activities. Curricular enhancements include elementary ELA and math and a nationally ranked STEM program. Students are successful in AP courses, interscholastic sports, creative arts, and they go on to attend our nation's finest universities. We are in the forefront in focusing on students' social emotional welfare. Our classroom facilities have been upgraded, especially in science, music, and art, and school building roofs no longer leak. My service extends to the board audit and policy committees, liaison to the Athletics Advisory Council, SCA, and Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. I'm also an active volunteer for my alma mater, Colgate University, serving on both the Alumni Corporation and University Board of Trustees. My professional experience. My professional skills in banking and finance, my belief in fiscal responsibility, and extensive knowledge of the business aspects of the district are valuable talents I bring to the board. Near-term issues center on the pandemic, yet other challenges persist. High enrollment, aging physical condition of our schools, the need to offer a challenging curriculum and diverse extracurriculars, and school budgets that pressure property taxes. Our immediate challenges. Virtually overnight, protecting public health from COVID-19 made remote learning our only option. Yet if remote learning and college-style lectures were the best way to teach grades K to 12, schools in the US would have moved to that platform years ago. Remote learning cannot replicate vital academic, social, and emotional interactions with teachers and among classmates. Our plan for September is to put students where they learn best, back in the classroom with their teachers and friends. The impact of COVID, however, those restrictions mean that school will look different. Remote learning in some shape or form is likely to be a feature. In developing detailed guidance and scenarios, we must incorporate the needs of at-risk populations, compliance with state mandates, technology, building logistics, financial realities, physical health and safety, social emotional health, as well as teaching and learning the curriculum. As you can see, school board governance requires a broad range of diverse skills and knowledge beyond how to teach. I hope what we discuss over the course of this evening will earn your support in re-electing me to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aitken. Mr. Mandery.
Thank you, Jessica, and the League of Women Voters. Thanks to everyone listening. It's great to feel democracy at work, and thank you, Pat, for participating and for your service. Board positions are unpaid, and we should all appreciate anyone who volunteers to improve kids' lives. But the status quo isn't working. I'm running to bring change to the board and to give voice to different experiences and perspectives. I have 2 kids in Manhasset schools. Our oldest is a graduating senior at the high school. Our daughter is a 5th grader at Muncie Park. Since I was a kid, my family dinners have revolved around the challenges facing teachers. My mom taught Spanish, my dad taught calculus. Later, he was principal of Brooklyn Tech and then Jericho High School. My wife and I are both career teachers. Over the past 20 years, I've overseen budgets, built an honors program, and developed a new curriculum that's become a national model. I've teamed with faculty locally and nationally to transform school cultures, and I've worked one-on-one with students to help them realize potential that they didn't see in themselves. All of these experiences have taught me 3 things. Schools are about teaching. School boards must hold administrators accountable and be good fiscal stewards, and listening to parents sustains excellence. What's gone on for the past 2.5 months isn't education. Sending home assignments isn't teaching, and 4 hours a week of school isn't enough. It's far less than our neighboring districts have offered, and most importantly, it's less than what our children's need. I've yet to hear any administrator acknowledge these basic truths. We are observing a failure of leadership. Teachers want to teach, but Manhasset teachers haven't yet received clear direction, and they haven't been given the support that they need to engage students to excel in the online environment. That's a failure of management. The administration's proposed budget isn't adequate to withstand the cuts and additional expenses that are certain to come next year. Our reserves are the lowest of any district on the North Shore. That's a failure to prepare. Parents feel ignored. A few weeks ago, an anonymous petition circulated at Muncie Park asking for more teaching. When it was called stupid at a meeting, the board remained silent. I've since met the author. I asked why she hadn't identified herself, and she told me that she feared retaliation. Hundreds of parents have told me that they feel shut out, unheard, and afraid. That's a failure to listen, or is it a failure to recognize parents as children's best advocates? I pledge to listen to parents. And excellence is also about seizing opportunity. This disruption invites us to rethink ancient assumptions about how we teach. Let's embrace mastery learning and let students progress at their own pace. Let's individualize learning plans and use meaningful holistic assessments. And let's enable our teachers and children to move beyond school walls and make connections across the country. Squandering this opportunity and waiting for a return to the old normal is a failure of vision. Schools are about teaching. School boards are about accountability and good stewardship, and sustained excellence requires listening to parents. I pledge my commitment to these principles, and I look forward to this evening's debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mandery. Mr. Mandery, the first question will go to you because you were the second to give an opening statement. And that question is, what's the Board of Education's role in whether kids go back to in-person learning in September? And what is your position specifically?
Well, I think generally speaking that the board's role is one of oversight. And I think that the board needs to step in when there has been mismanagement of a situation. And what's happened over the past 3 months has been a gross mismanagement of the situation. Moreover, the budget fails to acknowledge the reality. Even in Pat's opening statement, there's the hint of a suggestion that we're going to be back in something like normal school. It is impossible. At the best case scenario, we may be in a hybrid environment. We will be online for a significant amount of time. There is no denying that reality. Now, I guess miracles happen, and if one happens, well, that's great. And I would like my daughter, who will still be in elementary school, to be able to return to school and play. But that's not in the cards, and pretending that it is likely is a failure to prepare. And what we need to do, what we should have done, is construct a budget that prepares for the contingencies. Our budget is poorly prepared to deal with the revenue shortfalls that are likely to happen and the additional expenses that are virtually certain. We proceed, for example, there was some savings last year, although they're hard to tell because a lot of the budget documents and appropriations reports aren't transparent. Some savings. So maybe people would say we'd save some money on busing. We're just as likely to need to spend additional money to space out students on buses and run additional buses. And I hope over the course of the night we can talk about what the shortfalls in the budget are, because we are so, if Manhasset were subject to a stress test, we wouldn't be able to withstand it.
Ms. Aitken. Ms. Aitken, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I realized that. I believe the question that you asked was what the board's role is in the decision to return and what our position is, what my position is. The board's role really still has to be within the overall guidance and mandates of the governor and the state, but the board can prepare and the board can have a vision. And our vision is to the greatest extent possible, get students back in the building. And it very well may be a hybrid, and that's what I referred to when I said it needs lots of planning. So our position is that we need to be flexible. We need to have the ability to plan for various eventualities, whether we're in, which was a new normal, or whether we're completely out, or whether we go in and out. And that is the dialogue that's going on at schools across the country, universities as well, how to be flexible, how to be nimble, because the one thing that we did learn in the past few months is it's very difficult to predict exactly what is going to happen in this pandemic.
Thank you. The second question will begin with you, Ms. Aitken. Will you follow CDC guidelines for reopening schools in the fall? And what if we cannot meet those guidelines?
Absolutely, we would have to follow CDC guidelines because I don't believe that New York State would allow us to do anything other than that. The question, second part of the question as to what if we fail to do that is a little bit general, so it's hard to specifically answer that. But if I were to conjecture, so for example, if the CDC were to say that every child had to wear a mask all day long, and for some reason in Manhasset and Nassau County there was a shortage of masks, we obviously wouldn't be able to comply with that. But to the extent that things are within our power, we obviously will work towards doing what the CDC requires. The health and safety of the students and the faculty and staff is clearly a priority. It's clearly paramount. And we will do whatever we can to ensure that we comply and can open.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, of course, we would comply with CDC guidelines. I don't think that requires extensive discussion. The question is whether or not we're prepared to meet the additional expenses that would be required to comply with CDC guidelines. And when you look at how the administration has prepared to get us through the next year, what we've relied on, and Manhasset has relied on, is a series of one-shots. There was about a $250,000 reduction in healthcare costs, about a $700,000 reduction in staffing mix, meaning some teachers retired and were replaced by younger teachers who were cheaper. Some savings from closing, which are difficult to account for, and dipping into our reserves. Our reserves are 40th of 41 districts on Nassau County. To put that into perspective, our fund reserve, which is kind of, think of it as like your savings account. You have money coming in and going out, but it's kind of the surplus that you depend on to keep your cash flow flowing. Our reserves are about $11 million, or about 11% of what our operating budget is. By comparison, one point, Jericho's is $60 million, which is almost 50% of their operating budget. This is a long-term failure to prepare. And the cut that the board made at the last minute, which let's just accept the board's calculation and say that it's $750,000 approximately. That leaves us even more inadequately prepared to deal with the future. And furthermore, think of the additional contingencies. What if healthcare costs go up? What if the pension fund underperforms and we actually have a deficit there?
Thank you, Mr. Mandery. The next question will begin with you, and that question is, what are some ways you will improve communication to the community and to parents if elected?
Well, I think the failures here are principally of communication. And I have tried over the course of, since I've announced, to listen to as many people as possible. It's my nature. When the board and the administration, when the administration says that it's staged listening sessions, they've always been in the context of a plan that's been announced, and instead of bringing people in from the bottom up. And I think the tone is so disturbing. I can't tell you how many people have told me that they feel outraged at how the schools have dealt with the crisis, but feel silenced. And I hope Ms. Aitken will talk a little bit about, so she's circulated and it'll appear in the Manhasset Times an ad where she's asked people to effectively sign a loyalty pledge. It says, sign on to Friends of Pat Aitken. And that is so antithetical to the right message about what communication is. What happens if somebody doesn't want to sign? What happens if somebody signs and I'm elected and they feel that somehow I would disfavor them? Now, of course, I would never do that. But communities like this need to embrace debate. And I urge you to go onto my Facebook page and look at the exchange that Carlo Prinzo had with me. He called my candidacy an affront to the community. We need to embrace dissent and not stifle people who try to exercise want the best for their children.
Ms. Aitken.
One of the things that I'm very proud of is that as soon as the board on our first meeting, once the pandemic started, as soon as we went onto a sort of the Zoom platform for our meetings, we all agreed without any discussion, quite frankly, that we would have open meetings and we would continue to allow participation from the public. To our knowledge, there is no other district in Nassau County who has allowed that, and we have continued to do that well into our fifth meeting. We also had a series of 7, if we include the special ed community, 7 series of listening sessions. We did that with the superintendent, with the senior administration. We did it by grade level and had an opportunity for people to put their questions in so that the discussion could be focused, and they generally lasted about 2 hours each. I think that is listening. In addition to that, Christine Monterosso and I are the liaisons to the SCA, and we had regular communication with them to understand what the questions were, what was happening, what issues were being raised. So I do think that we had listened. But we can and should improve our broader communication as we roll the plan out. That is one thing that I think we can do. We can always do a better job at communicating, and we will strive to do that.
Ms. Aitken, for you, the next question is, what happens if the budget fails?
If the budget fails, typically we would end up with a possibility of a second vote. But given the timing, and as far as I'm aware at the moment, there's been a lack of clear guidance from New York State, we are likely to then just have to adopt a contingency budget. In the contingency budget, there would be a further $2.5 million reduction in the proposed budget. Excuse me, a further $1.7 million reduction in the proposed budget. But what that would do is mean that our expenses would be about, I believe the number is roughly 500,000 less than the 1920 budget. So if the budget does not pass, it is likely we would go straight to contingency.
Mr. Mandery, do you have any comment on that question, further comment?
I mean, regardless, I take issue with how the budget was prepared, but people should support the budget. I'm critical of the leadership, the administration, and the oversight over the administration, but it doesn't do anybody any good to vote down budgets. But I want people to understand, especially since so much of Pat's candidacy is premised upon fiscal stewardship, how poorly prepared we are to deal with exigencies. And we know one thing about next year is there will be enormous uncertainty. So the board's budget presupposes about a 5% cut in state aid. But Governor Cuomo has said that cuts in state aid might be as high as 20%. At CUNY, we've prepared for almost a 40% cut in revenue. What about pension costs? So historically, last year, this budget, we allocate about $5.5 million to pension costs. But as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, pension costs were $2 million higher. Is it conceivable that the pension fund will underperform and that there might be additional costs to subsidizing the pension fund? And to starters, the most important thing is we have a structural deficit of reserves. I've spent so much time over the past few weeks talking to other board members in other districts, and they're shocked at how low our reserves are.
The next question will begin with you, Mr. Mandery, and that question is, do you support a budget that is under the cap? If so, why?
Well, I've said that I think people should support this budget. It's always in the interest of students to support budget. I can't imagine a scenario in which voting down a budget is in a child or community's interest. It's never in your child's interest, and it's never in the community's interest. Supporting schools. Schools are the single most significant resource in a community, and they're the most important predictor of property values. So there's no rational reason to oppose a budget, which is a different question than talking about how you would construct a budget. And the concern, I mean, it is so glaring, and what I'll do after the debate is I'll post on my Facebook page data on fund reserves in Nassau County. And Manhasset, you'll see, is 41st on the list, just below Hempstead. We have 10% reserve, which means we could get through a tenth of a year with stress. And I ask you again, whether or not anybody believes that there is not greater than 10% in uncertainty in what's to come in the next year.
Ms. Aitken.
The comments about reserves and how we deal with that with the budget are a little bit simplistic. And I know when I first started on the school board, there are certain ways that the private sector conducts their budgets and finances that are different because we have to do things in a very structured way in the school world. For example, there's certain reserves that we don't have that other districts have because we just don't maintain them. But we're also required and limited by what reserves we can do. So when we look at the budget, just to sort of go back to, I guess, the fundamental question is what's below the cap. Clearly, I, as a board member last week, voted to recommend to the voters to approve a budget that's below the cap. And I've talked to a lot of people who all say they're very pleased that we didn't go up to the cap, that we're sensitive to the needs within the community. There are parents who have been furloughed, job losses, seeking unemployment, the financial pressures are there, and they were very appreciative that the board was responsive to those issues. Things are never black and white. It's always a balance. And if we look at things in a black and white, the community becomes divided and divisive, and that's not healthy. So one of the things that I've learned on being on the board is you do need to balance things. And that's very important. And you balance that by speaking to people in the community and understanding what their needs are. We do feel that with the excess fund balance that's projected at $1.3 million and about another $350,000 that's in the savings embedded in the budget.
Thank you. Mr. Mandery.
I want to really pick up on what Pat said. Pat said divisiveness is unhealthy. So I urge you to go to my Facebook page and read in its entirety the exchange that Carlo Prinzo had with me publicly. And again, he said my candidacy was an affront. I do not find Pat's comments divisive. I think it's a respectable opinion. I think reasonable minds can differ on many things. I don't get the argument why we've maintained such significantly lower reserves than competing school districts, but I don't think airing that debate in public is divisive. And so much of what's problematic about this debate, listen to how few voices. So I'm sure Pat may have spoken with friends and neighbors who feel that the budget is correct. clearly that's not the only perspective. I promise you, at this point, I have the wind at my sails of hundreds of people who have told me that they're dissatisfied with how this closing has been handled and with the budget. So instead of having a culture where we have to fear speaking in public, let's embrace diversity and dissent. That's what education is about. It's teaching people how to disagree civilly. And it's so antithetical to everything that I believe as an educator to even say that expressing a dissenting view divides a community. It enriches a community and it improves decision-making.
Ms. Aitken, the next question is your question. Will taxes need to be raised, and how would you deal with this?
Taxes need to be raised. I'm not sure I really understand the question, so I'll try to do the best that I can. The only way that we can raise taxes is through the annual levy for the budget. So I'm not sure what really is meant by that. If the question is, can we go back mid-year and do a second levy, then no, we don't have the ability to do that. So as I said, I'm sort of puzzled by the question, and I'm trying to stick to the question rather than expand beyond it.
I read the question verbatim. If you feel that you
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand. As I said, I think it's because perhaps the person who phrased the question didn't appreciate that the levy is an annual levy, and that's what's put to a vote by the to the residents, and that we get to do that one time. It's different for other propositions, but the tax levy is one time.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, the chickens will come home to roost one way or the other. We don't know precisely what the future is going to look like, but we know that there's enormous uncertainty, and that uncertainty is virtually certain to lean in the direction of putting significant stress both on the revenue side and the expenditure side of the district. In other words, we may have less coming in. What happens if businesses default and they're not able to make the payments that are expected? That's a revenue shortfall, and that's entirely possible. And there are additional expenditures like additional, say, pension costs, which seem virtually certain to increase, and costs of educating children, say, for example, education, and other things that you can't predict. So we're not prepared to meet those uncertainties. Then, when I say the chickens come home to roost, in year N+1, a year out, well, how do we deal with that? And there are only two possible ways. There are cuts, which you have to make, and that has consequences for students. We have already, the board, by reducing the budget between iteration 1 and iteration 2, has already reduced the budget by $750,000. Everybody needs to understand, unless the cap is ever pierced, that is a permanent reduction in student aid. And if we have a shortfall, the only way to make it up is by cuts, or then you have to try to pierce the cap in the other year. Those are the only possibilities, unless a miracle happens.
Thank you. Mr. Mandery, this question was addressed specifically to you. I'm just going to read it verbatim. Carlo Prinzo, current Board of Ed trustee, the Manhasset, school district is currently negotiating with a number of its bargaining units, ultimately a teachers union. As a teacher who is or was part of a teachers union yourself, how will you objectively be able to participate in this process? Whose priority will you have, the teachers or the community?
Well, my priority would be for the communities, but I don't see any tension between the priority of the community and the priority of the teachers. I mean, I think communities are enriched by teachers that are pleased to work in a district. I don't know what the question is. I mean, I think it's sort of ironic to address that question to me, because I'm the one that's saying that the school district needs to deliver an education to people. That is my first priority. All I will say is that my touchstone in everything that I do, I would say actually everything that I do in my life is what's right for kids. So I would consider these questions in the same way that I would every other question, which is how do we produce a quality education for the students of Manhasset? What we've produced over the past 3 months isn't a quality education. So that's the starting point of the position. But I mean, I can't imagine any conflict that I would have by virtue of being an educator.
Ms. Aitken?
I'm sorry, the question though wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mr. Mandery, because the question, as I understood it, was as a member of a teachers union where he works, how he would approach it. So since I'm not a teacher and I'm not a member of the union, I don't really have that same issue. So it would be difficult for me to respond on a personal level.
That's fine. According to the rules, you're permitted a response to every question. So I just want to make sure I check in with you.
Thank you.
So you will start with the next question, and that is, what would you be sure to repeat in the fall with online learning? And what will you ensure doesn't happen? What have been the biggest failings and successes of the district's response thus far?
Well, certainly not being able to flip a switch and go from a traditional classroom environment to remote learning, we can't say that that was a success. But what we did do, and I think was important, was we continued to work people through change. Human beings don't like change. Change doesn't come easily. And what we continued to do was work through different phases and try to progress and add things. We also try to take into account the circumstances of individual families. We have first responders, we have people who work in the healthcare field, we have teachers who are home with children, we have people who all of a sudden were all home working from home, and we really were getting an incredible range of anxious parents, anxious teachers, and so what we did was to work through things gradually. But where we got to is not going to be sufficient for us in the fall. So that's one of the things that we need to do. And one of the things that we've started to do is to do a survey of neighboring districts, as well as private schools, as well as schools in the nation, to understand what the best practices in this remote learning environment are. And that's what we would hope to capitalize on and weave into the plan for the fall.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, I would first listen to the community proactively. I think that community engagement needs to be organic from the ground up, not a group of hand-selected committees. That was one of the most disturbing things I heard at the last board meeting, is that the administration would pick people. Some of what you've heard over the past several months is an echo chamber. People keep hearing the views that support what they're saying, and that's not healthy for decision-making. I'll give a no-brainer. We need a uniform platform, and it's absolutely insane that we haven't managed to arrive at one. And it should be. There's no reason to wait to September. Pick one. G Suite's great, but pick one that you want. My son, who's graduating in a few weeks, he has work coming into him on 8 different platforms. My daughter, if you try to, I'm sure many of you who are listening sympathize with this, if you try to make sense of all the work that's coming in, it's impossible from a parent's perspective. Of course, individual families should be accommodated, and I feel very strongly that if somebody thinks that online learning is wrong for their children, they should be able to opt out, and the district should accommodate that. But the most important thing is that we need to deliver an education. And I'll say, to my perspective as an educator, I would be the only educator on the board. And I would say that the board is effectively, if you look at it from the outside, monolithic. 3 of the 5 people don't even have children in the schools. And I think it's enriched by a diversity of perspectives.
Mr. Mandery, you will begin the next question, and that is, what new supports would you put into place for teachers, specifically elementary school teachers, to enable them to meet the needs of the students next year? What specifically will change from where we are now?
Right. I mean, I was disappointed in the budget conversation. One of the simplest things to do would be to offer additional tech support to teachers. So I heard Sean Adcroft say very clearly that he needed additional support. I, for next year, would have prioritized that over a lacrosse coach and additional hires that are unlikely to be able to do their job. I think part of teachers' frustration, and I say this as a teacher, Zoom is not really scary change technology. I learned to use it in 2 minutes. Even if you're tech uncomfortable, I mean, my mom doesn't like technology, I could teach her to use it in 10, 15 minutes. That's the easy part. The frustrating part to teachers is dealing with connectivity issues, and they have to be removed from the business of doing that. And there are very significant equity concerns and connectivity issues, and they need to be resolved. And I've heard nothing but support from the philanthropic community in Manhasset to resolve those connectivity issues. But teachers have to be empowered to do their job. My first experience on Zoom was teaching an ethics class at Appalachian State University. I taught some there, and I did it some in kind of a hybrid environment, an online environment. I had a dedicated tech person. It was the easiest experience in the world and one of the richest teaching experiences of my life. So that's the type of support that teachers need.
Ms. Aitken.
I'm disappointed that disappointed to hear that there's not an understanding that the issues of Zoom were not technology, but were privacy issues. Zoom bombing, privacy, teacher concerns in New York City, and other places that stopped using Zoom. So that's one thing. The second thing is on the tech support. The support is there, and one of the things in the budget, if one were to look at the budget and understand what happened, is that some of the expenditures that would have been made next year on tech, on laptops, on Chromebooks, on laptops for teachers that would also be able to use with the smart boards in classrooms. So they those laptops serve a dual purpose. Those are being purchased now out of 1920 monies. So the support is there. There's also been money in for professional development and assistance, and the technology support has been there to help teachers. Some of them, yes, are getting used to making YouTubes of themselves and doing other things that they haven't done before, but there's not been any withholding of that kind of support. We also have to be mindful that we are in a community where students didn't have laptops, and that was really significant. So if the teachers got the technology and the student does it, it's difficult. During the course of the last couple of months, the district actually gave out 400 of the Chromebooks that were in school to students at home. That's a significant undertaking. It takes time to do that, to understand who needs them and get those out. So again, I think that the supports for teachers.
Ms. Aitken, this next question will begin with you. Every teacher at MHS is rated as, quote, highly effective or effective, unquote, in terms of annual performance. In the context of a new and evolving paradigm in terms of how instruction is delivered going forward, are there any plans to reevaluate how teacher performance is measured and better differentiated?
One of the things with the performance is some of that does come down from the state. So we would have to look within the rubrics as how that's done. But it's difficult to, the performance metrics were actually suspended by New York State because you don't have the same ability to go in and do an observation the way that you would be able to jump in and jump out. So I think that there would have to be a revisiting of it, but there's not been any discussions about that yet at the state level that I'm aware of.
Mr. Mandery, any comment?
Well, I so appreciate the question because I've tried throughout the campaign to talk about the opportunities that I see in the closing and what technology can do for us. So in sort of educator jargon, right, those would be summative assessments. They're like grades, as opposed to formative assessments, which is feedback, constructive feedback, qualitative feedback from which people grow. And of course, technology opens the door to evaluating people in such a broader, holistic way. And evaluating teachers differently, of course, let's have different understandings of the value that teachers add, and let's change the way we evaluate students. We evaluate students in the same way that we did in 1950 and 1920 with a single grade. What elementary student is well served by the EGPF system? What students value, and I can say this as an educator, students value constructive feedback. Parents understand qualitative assessments, and it can't be that the measure of a human being, that the measure of a young human being is their performance on a high-stakes standardized test. And too often, too many of the district's tracking decisions, which have stakes based on our existing educational philosophy, damn students on the basis of summative assessments, and technology is an invitation to see them as human beings.
All right, and the next question begins with you, Mr. Mandery. It reads, what will be the best practice of remote learning if this has to be continued in fall? Do we know any best model from other school districts?
Right, I mean, that's a great question, and I mean, I first think that the way to answer the question, I know the way that I would think about beginning to answer the question is to collect data from other places. So to begin with, every time I've tuned in, I've listened at every board meeting, as hundreds of parents have, the administration has simply said that what we're doing is adequate. No parent believes that what's gone on has been adequate. Maybe there have been extremely conscientious teachers who have overcome the obstacles and delivered a quality education, but those are the exceptions. The average parent is worried how they're going to make up 6 months next year. So what's a best practice? So we know that synchronous learning works for the majority of people. It may not work for everybody. There may be some students that can't handle it. We have to resolve connectivity issues. We need to engage Manhasset's wonderful philanthropic community who is committed to resolving these issues as soon as possible so that disappears as an issue. And synchronous learning is essential because so much of what teachers provide, so much of what I provide as a teacher is social and emotional learning, and that can't happen through assignments. Assignments drive parents crazy. It shifts the burden onto them and nobody learns anything. Bringing people together is the essential part of teaching.
Ms. Aitken.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we are already in the process of trying to understand what those best practices are. And there's really not a lot of research out there because this has only been going on for a very short period of time. But the important part is that what we're doing is we ask questions, we spend time speaking to the members of the community, the students, the teachers, the people in other districts, we do that as well, to understand what's best from the children and look at the things that distract from the goals, what improvements are needed, and take the views of the community on the issues. So when we go through and have these discussions, we'll be able to do that. I think it's unfortunately not an accurate characterization to say that when Dr. Buchera said at the meeting that we'll be selecting people for committees, it's no different than any process. People volunteer and they're selected for it. It's not, it's the way that the citizens advisory committees are populated, and we would go to those groups to do that. There was nothing that was meant to be anything other than a process question. So again, I think that what we've outlined is that I think that we're a great board. We've done a lot of work and we've done great work. We've hit a speed bump. These last 2 months are not representative of the work before then. So that doesn't mean to say that in 2 months from now, we can't be back where we were. I think that focusing on this isn't really representing the body of work of the board and the administration and the fine teachers that we have.
And Ms. Aitken, this question will begin with you. Do you think that vocational training is adequate in your district? How would you make it stronger?
The vocational training in our district really is done through BOCES, excuse me, and then we do have students who attend various BOCES programs, both through senior year and sometimes beyond the age of 18 where they can. So I think that from a organizational perspective, it's probably the best way to do it. We don't have the ability to have all of those programs and the breadth of those programs within the district because we're a small district, and using the resources of BOCES where they can basically group those and provide those vocational programs for a number of districts really is the most effective way to do that.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, I appreciate the thrust of the question because the focus always has to be on what's right for the individual student. And I've advocated, and I hope you'll go to my campaign Facebook page at Mandery for Manhasset or email me at manderyformanhasset@gmail.com. And I've tried to talk so much about mastery learning or competency-based learning, because this philosophical shift to allowing students to proceed at their own pace. If they're super accelerated and they could do calculus as a 6th grader, God bless, let them do calculus as a 6th grader. But the decision should always be made on the basis of what's right for the student and not the constraints of the building. I also want to take the question and say, we need to rethink what we mean by vocation. And one of the things, as a son of a math teacher and a math guy myself, one of the things that fascinates me is that we teach math basically the same way we did a century ago. And of course, everybody understands that the vocational challenges, opportunities in society have dramatically changed. What type of skills do you need? What percentage of people use geometry or trigonometry in their jobs? I'll point you to I'll post it on my Facebook page. It's less than 5%. What types of people need facility with statistics and data? And let's begin holistically, organically engaging the community in how we think we prepare the next generation of learners.
Mr. Mandery, the next question will begin with you. What is your vision of education in this community? How would you provide quality education for a diverse student population, e.g. gifted students, average students, special education, and/or students that have English as a second language?
Well, obviously, I appreciate that question. I think it is the central question for an educator. How do you make school work for everybody? And I really urge, I'll link to it on my website. There's a wonderful book called The End of Average, which talks about how the kind of characteristic approach of teachers is to teach to the middle of the class. There is no middle person. There is no median person. Every student is an individual. And accepting that premise changes everything. So of course, some accelerated, some super smart students need to go fast. But of course, there's no uniformity to this. Maybe somebody needs to go fast in math, but doesn't want to go quite so fast in English. The point is to construct your model around the needs of the student. Technology is an invitation. It's an invitation to change the way we educate people, because we don't need to rely solely on a lecture format. Having an online environment as a tool in an educator's arsenal opens a whole world of possibilities and allows us to think of teachers instead of as the single provider of information, as a coach and a mentor and somebody who opens young people to possibilities. And at the core of my philosophy is that belief. And I know that it's one that's shared by educators, because it is why they got into the profession in the first place.
Ms. Aitken?
I actually believe that our district does an excellent job of teaching students at all levels that they're involved with. We have a large special ed population whose needs are met. We have students who take APs who are involved with science research. We have an elementary program for accelerated math. We actually looked at that program earlier this year, and we put up a straw man to say, well, what would happen if we didn't have the program? And the overwhelming response from the community was that that was something that they valued. That is differentiation at that level. It's differentiation for someone who's strong at math at elementary school. Unfortunately, Mr. Mandery at that meeting spoke against it, saying that it was tracking as opposed to differentiation, which I wouldn't agree with. But we are keeping the program and moved it up to 6th grade. And by that, we felt it was continuing to give the opportunity. As I said earlier in my opening, I'm a product of Colgate University. I believe in a liberal arts education. And that liberal arts education means that learning things like geometry or trig or stats or history or ELA or other things that you may not think of what you're going to use in the future helps your mind. And it helps your mind learn to make the connections across various modules. So I do think that, and I do believe in the richness of that base of education. Plus, we've all heard from people who say, until my child was exposed to, pick a subject, then they didn't realize it was something they wanted.
Thank you. The next question will begin with you, Ms. Aitken. Have you considered, or would you consider, bringing in a medical expert to help make decisions on how to safely bring our children back to school, or for guidance leading up to that point?
I can't say that it's been considered, although, again, if it was something that we needed to do, we would. The district does have a physician that is retained as part of the annual retention. They do physicals and other things. We do have an excellent staff of nurses. We have a terrific lead nurse, but we also have people in the community who are much more familiar with things than certainly I could say I would be. So yes, we of course would draw on those resources. But again, I don't want to say we would use those resources and then imply that we don't have some internal resources as well.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, of course, I would rely on the advice of medical experts. I can't imagine any universe in which they wouldn't guide the decision. And I want to talk for a second about what Pat said about the accelerated math program, that it was unfortunate that I spoke against it. Who was on my side? The Deputy Superintendent for Curriculum. So many of you, I'm sure, have engaged with the district about double early tracking. And Dr. Pasti, on the basis of not majority opinion in the educational research community, unanimous opinion in the educational research community, recommended changing that program, replacing that program so there were multiple entry points for students to get to multivariable calculus. His report included annotations, and he's a very, very smart guy, was consistent with best practices. When I tell people that we track students on the basis of fourth grade data, they are aghast. Now, the problem with the process, right, is it included one sector of the community that issued a response. And the right way to do it, it was in response to a plan, is to begin that process organically, to educate everybody about it. But the thing that drove me crazy was I emailed the board and I sent them a 3-page email with annotations to research, because tracking is bad for everybody. That doesn't mean we can't accelerate kids and get them to higher math. But tracking is bad, it stigmatizes people. And I didn't even receive a reply. And I can tell you many students, many parents have had the same experience with the administration and the board.
Mr. Mandery, the next question begins with you. I heard they won't be able to solve the busing issue. How would you fix this?
Well, I know how I would begin to think about solving a problem like that. And the first thing is I would have said, in my budgeting for next year, it's a massive variable that needs to be accounted for. I think, generally speaking, we are going to need to reconceptualize how we think of buildings as physical space and how we move people to and from them and within them. The pandemic changes everything. Regardless of what the state guideline is, how many of you will be comfortable putting your child on a crowded bus? My wife and I have had many conversations about it. I don't know the answer. I know that it will be something that will give us extreme hesitation. What about, and I think I agree with Pat, that the needs of many different types of families need to be considered. So what about families who have 2 parents who are going to work? Well, the district may need to think about schools as effectively a place where kids who have unresolvable connectivity issues can sit in socially distanced spaces, and where there could be accommodations for children who don't otherwise have care. But the point of this is we need a massive contingency, not a $1 million COVID contingency. We need best case scenario, we would have been planning all along for this, but we need to acknowledge the reality that this is a massive variable, and the failure to prepare for that massive uncertainty is a gross administrative error.
Ms. Aitken.
I'm actually disappointed by the question because there's been no determination that we won't be able to solve the busing issue. So I'm not sure who it was that heard that, quote unquote. But I think it's indicative of some of the things that we have to face. A number of the things that Mr. Mandery has said tonight, when there's misinformation, we really need to correct that in the community. So I don't know what they mean by the busing issue. If they mean that they have heard that there's a bus company that's gone out of business, well, that's not our bus company. If they've heard other districts have issues, we contract with a bus company. We have not yet gone into the analysis that says, how many buses do we need? We may not need that many more buses because parents may not want to put their kids on buses. So I am sort of, it's difficult to again answer that. You know, in terms of trying to, and I think you can see, I'm trying to answer the questions rather than take a very broad view. And I understand that it's easy to sit back and try to criticize what the board has done. But this board's sole objective has been to maintain the quality of the education that the kids receive. And we do that within the budget and practical constraints. And I'm proud to have been a member of this board, and I want to continue doing that work. And part of that is making sure that we've got the right information out, and when the right information isn't there, that we can correct it. So again, so far there's no busing issue that we haven't been able to solve.
Thank you. The next question will begin with you, Ms. Aitken. Please provide specifics on your plan for the early elementary grades as far as online learning.
Specifics. Again, I think that to say that they're my specifics, I don't tell, no single board member tells what the plan is. As we said before, we're going to do this together with as a consensus, working with the teachers and the parents and the people who are part of the administration, Dr. Butera, Dr. Passy, Dr. Kendall, Dr. Allison Rushforth, people who understand what needs to be done. So for me to sit here today when we haven't finished the best practices, when we haven't done the survey that we're going to send out to do the survey of the parents, and to just pretend that I've got an answer really isn't the way that we operate. I think that's basically my answer.
Mr. Mandery.
Isn't it astonishing that we're almost 3 months in and the administration claims that parents are satisfied and they haven't surveyed parents? I know how I would begin to think about the question of elementary education. So everybody acknowledges that the needs of children to thrive, or the ability of children to thrive in an online environment, is grossly different for young children than older kids. Zoom, I'm a college professor. My school went off on a Tuesday. I was online on a Thursday on Zoom. Everybody had the same time with me that they would have had if we were live in class. For high school students and middle school students, this can work very, very well. It is not as engaging as being in a real classroom, but it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. Humor happens. You can pick up on body language. When people have their cameras on, it's actually very warm. Now, for younger learners, for K through 2 or something like that, it's a very different situation. And one of the problems in the way we've approached this problem is approached the closing is that we feel constrained by ancient structures. So we organize kids into classes of 24, or at Muncie Park and one grade at Shelter Rock, a little bit larger if you're in 5th or 6th grade. And we don't think about whether the right way to educate the younger kids is to do it in smaller groups. There's no doubt that the manpower demands of educating and the space demands of educating younger learners need to take priority in dealing with transition to the online or hybrid environment.
Mr. Mandery, the next question begins with you. That question is, please let me know where you believe the cuts should come from with respect to the budget, pardon me. With respect to the budget, please let me know where you believe the cuts should come from in order to fund the reserve and pandemic issues facing the schools.
Well, I wouldn't have cut the budget in the first place. I would have structurally, right, the long-term approach, the best practice of fiscal planning is to build up your reserve over time. So this is a historical failure to prepare. I can't imagine cutting any service for students in this environment. What I'm trying to talk about is that the needs of students and the need to be flexible in accommodating the space needs, particularly as the last question suggested, we need an enormous amount of flexibility, and the failure to build that into the budget and the failure to have maintain significant reserves that are competitive with our similar districts on Long Island is a failure of fiscal stewardship. So I would make that a priority over time to make sure that the reserves of the district are adequate to deal with exceptional circumstances like what we're dealing with now.
Ms. Aitken.
To say that there's a failure of fiscal stewardship really reflects a lack of understanding of how the various districts have built up their reserves. But the question that you ask about what you would cut in the budget, also the question itself seems to think that we would actually be sitting here today and building a budget for the pandemic. What we try to explain when we have the budget discussions that we've had in the board meetings is that there's not a line, and unfortunately we can't create a line that says this is COVID money. It's not how New York State operates with its schools. But what we said is that we would notionally leave things in. So for example, the comment earlier about coaches, we very clearly said that we would not necessarily hire the coaches or use the coaches if we're in a different environment. But we didn't take that money out because that was a way of leaving in money to give us flexibility. Similarly, as I said earlier, we did the same thing with the future ready classrooms. So there are opportunities in the budget. It could be in busing, it could be in refs and umps, it could be in other areas, but we'd have to see specifically what we aren't doing and we would transfer those monies over to use for other things.
Ms. Aitken, this question is specifically addressed to you.
Mm-hmm.
It is, why is there no instruction on Fridays? What is happening on Fridays that prevents instruction from taking place?
As I said earlier, the development from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 was to work collectively and to bring things along so that it was a level that people would all feel comfortable with. The idea at the elementary schools, particular on Friday, not to have a direct Zoom time and direct instruction was to allow the teachers prep time to be able to do their prep work, review the work that the students had submitted, and take time for any professional development that they would need to work with the tech guys to understand how to use some of the things. There was mention earlier about, and I didn't think it was 8 platforms. I actually thought we had, sort of 4 primary sources. This year was the year that the district was to move to the Canvas learning management system. So had we completed that move and this pandemic happened next year, we would have been on one platform. But we still had teachers using emails and teacher web pages and using Google and using Canvas. And that was confusing, but that's basically where we had been. The idea behind Fridays at this point in time was to give more time for planning.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, there's no reason not to teach on Fridays, and there's no reason not to offer more than an hour a day of instruction. Syosset offers its elementary school students almost 3 hours a day of instruction, including specials. There's no reason that music lessons should have stopped. Maybe not everybody can make it every time, but there's no reason that this core service, teachers teach, schools educate, that's their function. And there is no practical reason why it can't be provided in this environment. By the way, why? Okay, maybe the administration was blindsided by the pandemic. Okay, so by the way, I wasn't alarmist. People said to me, what's going on? I was like, don't worry, they'll get their act together. I felt differently after 7 weeks in. Why now? Why don't we make incremental improvements? Why is phase 3 regarded as fait accompli? Everybody knows it can be better. If there are some teachers who feel uncomfortable, well, let them have professional development on Friday. But I am sure there were plenty of teachers who embrace this environment and understand its potential and would be happy to teach. And as a general matter, I just can't help but thinking, I know because in my listening sessions, so many people have asked that question. Nobody has verbalized it at a board meeting. And think about how few people have felt emboldened to ask those questions, even though you know from your community conversations that hundreds share that view. And the idea that people are afraid to ask questions, or that dissent is framed as misinformation, is the core of a community problem, a pathology of conversation.
Mr. Mandery, begin with you. The superintendent was to develop a wing for social emotional development. How feasible is that, and where would you find the money and space?
Well, I've heard about the plan. I actually support, I think holistically, I think in terms of looking at a district as a whole, the emotional and well-being of students is core. And generally speaking, in America, schools have been very slow to recognize the priority that needs to be attached to promoting social and emotional learning. I can't comment specifically on that proposal. I've heard a lot of stories about it. I think in a general sense, this is probably evident from all of my comments, I would approach any problem by bringing in community input at the planning stage as opposed to at the reactive stage. But I think in my approach to education that cultivating social and emotional learning, and there are wonderful ways of building that into curriculums, and teachers are generally extraordinarily enthusiastic about doing this both implicitly and explicitly, needs to be a priority, certainly in Manhasset, but everywhere. One of the most satisfying things that I did, I mentioned this class that I taught at Appalachian State. Out of that work, I've developed with a group of other people who kind of specialize in this type of work, a listening curriculum, which I've now piloted with several groups of students. And it's amazing. What they do is we just sit and work on just listening to other people with empathy. And as a listener, man, the thing that got my dander up is when parents ask questions and they're branded as stupid or dismissed without an answer.
Ms. Aitken?
Well, I'm actually glad this time that I get to follow and can correct some comments that are made that are not correct, because I've not been able to do that on a lot of the other comments so far. The SCL development and initiative actually did start with a survey, and it was a survey that was funded by the SCA 2 years ago. There was tremendous involvement and input from the community and the parents and the students. There were numerous discussions afterwards, and there have continued to be discussions. So the whole initiative of SCL, both as a concept and what's done with the students, as well as to try to get all of the SCL professionals into one area so that they can work more collegially, has all been done with discussions all along the way. When last year, that was part of the vote that was put to the community to use funds from the capital reserve for the SEL wing. And since then, as we've worked in the design phase, again, we have involved students, parents, teachers. So it's been very collaborative to do that. What the SEL initiative is something that we're very proud of. And Dr. Butera and I think it was Dr. Passy and Allison Rushert have actually gone to conferences in New York State. They've been asked to speak about it. They've been asked to speak with other superintendents because we really are a template. We are on the leading edge and we are doing things that no one else is doing there.
Ms. Aitken, this next question will begin with you. There may be a month left of school. Will there be any improvements for the rest of the year, especially at the elementary level, or are we done for the year?
Well, we're not done for the year, and I guess it depends on what you mean by improvements. Certainly, the comment had been made when phase 3 was rolled out that we wanted to have some stability. We didn't want to continue to make change. That's what Dr. Butera had said. So the structure itself is likely not to change. But within that, what we've continued to do, and the board has asked, and the coordinators and the principals working on it, are things like talk to the teachers, help them with the curriculum, help them understand, use this time to continue to learn how to work with the kids, make sure they're getting the connections. You know, we talk about Zoom time as if everybody's 1 hour of Zoom is the same, and it's really not. So it's using the time effectively for both instruction, right? It's synchronous and asynchronous. Instruct and then give the kids time to do work afterwards. So there's lots of opportunities to continue to do that. I think at the high school, we all know that once the kids take their APs, they do tend to check out. But Sydney Ginsburg, who's our school board representative from the student body, has made suggestions about projects that can be done that are group projects and ways for the students to connect with each other. So there's lots of opportunity for things to be done. But again, that's different than changing the schedule. And the schedule, again, I recently, as recent as today, I've looked at them, and some of the comments that people make maybe one-offs or maybe misinterpreted, but the amount of Zoom.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but the timer's.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? And I'm sorry. You know what's happening is I keep putting my hand on the screen because it's flipping from the gallery view. And so I was stopping to do that because I guess that was distractive. But yes, unfortunately, I didn't see that. I didn't mean to do that. So I guess we have to go back to my finger across the screen to put it back to the gallery view. I apologize.
No problem. Mr. Mandery.
Well, what's missing is instruction, then reflection, then instruction. Having a structured school day doesn't mean 6 hours of Zoom, but it means a structured day, 45 minutes of Zoom, a lesson, an assignment. Come back to discuss with the teacher, go out into breakout rooms, work on a small project, have a time for a special, have an end of day session where you discuss what's going to happen tomorrow. That constructs a day for kids. And that might not be right for some kids, but for most kids, what they need right now is to have their days structured. And structuring 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. isn't doing anybody any good. This question, why can't we do something with the rest of the month? It's a tragedy. It's a lost opportunity, a month lost of learning for 3,000 people. And it's the single question that I get asked the most. And the most disturbing thing is when multiple people have told me this story, that they've persistently asked the question of the administration, they've had their emails blocked. And I hear all of this. I hear the board saying that everybody's happy. And I can't help but thinking that I know that that is conclusively not true. And I hope at some point during this debate that Pat will address the structural problems with people feeling excluded and silenced and pushed upon to take loyalty pledges and shamed if they dare to say something dissent. It doesn't mean if I say I'm not satisfied, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or somebody's a bad person. It means when everybody says it, we want the best for our children. Everybody wants the best for our children, and this is not good.
Mr. Mandery, you're next in order. I'm going to have to ask you to give the best answer you can to this question because it is the next question in the rotation. It is, why did the superintendent and assistant superintendent block emails from concerned parents? And why further did the BOE not respond to inquiries about this issue?
Well, I don't know the answer to the question. I know from many people have told me these stories that it's happened. Now, there are important details in this. Did the board know? I don't know. And I think that's important for the board if we began to have an honest dialogue instead of treating me and the hundreds of people or thousands of people who feel the way I do as annoying dissenters or purveyors of misinformation, as concerned citizens and parents, and engaging them and learning their concerns, then this conversation changes. All I can say, I won't out the person, one of Pat's most loyal supporters reached out to me by email. And I was like, that's interesting. And of course I have a conversation with a person. I don't have any power. I'm just a citizen. You as a taxpayer have a right to have your opinion heard and responded to. That doesn't mean you have a right to the action that you want. But I will say this as a teacher, I will say this as a citizen, I will say this as a taxpayer. You have an absolute right to engagement. And this has so consistently failed to happen. It doesn't matter what situation it is. People always have to be heard because parents are the best protectors of their children and the key to sustaining a district.
Ms. Aitken.
I'm not aware of any emails that get blocked, so I am very surprised to hear that that's what's being said. We do have an honest dialogue, and I understand and I expected that in this environment that there'd be lots of criticisms. My style is not necessarily to engage in a debate and quibble about everything, and I try to answer the questions directly as I can. But we have answered emails. I've spent hours on the phone. All of the board members have spent hours on the phone. We've also spoken to hundreds of people in the community. And there is a diversity of opinion, and we listen to that. And I think it's very unfair to paint everything with a very broad brush as if that's not happening. But again, this is a meet the candidate, and it's not a debate, so it's difficult to really respond to some of this. We have answered emails. We have some of the emails, quite frankly, have been rather abusive in their tone. We don't go back and say to someone that they don't deserve a response. We respond to it. So again, I don't know where Mr. Mandery is talking about a loyalty pledge. No one has ever talked about a loyalty pledge. No one's asked for a loyalty pledge. People in this community are able to speak freely, and that's all that really is. So again, I understand that this was going to be kind of a difficult campaign, but it is what it is.
I'm going to ask one last question. It's a pretty general one on a topic that's coming up a lot. And then we will do closing statements. So Ms. Aitken, if school does not reopen in the fall, how will online distance learning improve? What will it look like? And how will you make the kids feel more connected?
Again, I think that's sort of a variation on the theme. We said if school does not reopen, so that's saying if we're completely still remote, we are working towards having a very fulsome plan and a more robust plan than we were able to do with a flip of a switch, or not able to do on a flip of a switch back in March. So basically, I can't tell you today because I don't know exactly what the requirements and issues are going to be. I don't just make things up. Work off of reality. And what we said is we're going to work with the parents, the community, the teachers, and we're going to develop what we think is the best robust plan, and we're going to benchmark. So that's my answer.
Mr. Mandery.
I think the best way to engage students is with some synchronous learning. You need flexible approaches and you need to engage teachers. I just want to say, I don't question, Pat, your efforts. I don't doubt that you and your colleagues have worked very hard. I don't understand why you doubt what I'm saying, that many parents feel utterly without voice. And when I speak about a loyalty pledge, what I mean is emailing people and asking them to sign an ad saying Friends of Pat Aitken. What it feels like as an outsider, even as a member of the community, is that it's a club. And if you're on the inside, you get a certain degree of responsiveness. And if you're on the outside, you don't. Education needs to be blind to race, gender, ethnicity, politics, who your friends in, whatever. You come into my classroom, I educate you. And if I'm a steward of the district, I will make sure that whoever you are, whether you voted for Pat or not, obviously I'll never know, whether you publicly said it, whether you call me a bad name, I will fight for your children, for your child. And because that is the essence of the educator's mission. And somehow, I don't know what you characterize this conversation. This is a conversation that this community needs to have because there are so many people who feel that they've been excluded. That doesn't mean they're entitled to the answer, the precise answer that they want, but they're entitled to be heard.
And with that, we will begin closing statements. Ms. Aitken, you may deliver your closing first.
I love this community. I value the education my 3 children received in our schools. I'm proud and humbled to be an advocate for public education as a board member. And I'm proud of my strong record with the district, maintaining and improving the excellent education our children receive, and engaging transparently with community stakeholders to build consensus while exercising fiscal responsibility. In seeking re-election, I pledge to you that I'm as committed, passionate, and focused on this important responsibility as ever. I first ran for the board during, pardon me, another challenging and turbulent time in our community. My message then is just as relevant now. We must balance competing demands, collaborate with all stakeholders, and strive to ensure all students receive a high-quality education within the framework of fiscal prudence. Being an effective board member takes more than good intentions and high aspirations. Navigating the uncharted territory that lies ahead requires wisdom, creativity, leadership. Proven leaders with integrity who are fair and honest, with strong interpersonal skills to compromise, collaborate, and build consensus when solving problems, who are open-minded, objective, good listeners, who think strategically, weighing perspectives and the implications of their decisions, and who apply common sense and good judgment to manage through change. My in-depth knowledge of the district and its finances, and my professional skills in business and fiscal management will be particularly important as we navigate the challenging educational and budgetary issues to come. In asking for your vote, I ask you to consider my demonstrated abilities as an effective and objective board member, my perspectives as a parent and engaged member of our community, and a business and financial professional who will continue to bring the right skills to the board as we navigate these unprecedented times. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mandery.
Well, for the past several weeks, I've been listening to parents, hundreds of them in dozens of Zoom meetings, and what I hear is frustration. Superficially, it's a frustration about schools not teaching, but more deeply, it's a frustration about not being heard. And I'm so saddened that after this whole conversation and debate, we haven't even begun to unpack the deep hurt that people feel. Of all the stories, the ones that hurt the most are from parents that told me that they won't speak up because they fear retaliation. And that is hundreds of people, whether the board wants to recognize it or not, or have had their email ignored or blocked. And that's many, many people by the administration simply because they want their children to learn. If you look again, go to my Facebook page. The board acts like this is a zero-sum game, as if you say something critical about the administration or the district, it means you're disloyal. I believe that communities and schools are enriched by diversity of people, diversity of experience, and diversity of perspective. I've spoken tonight, and I've spoken over the campaign about the opportunities present in the pandemic, opportunities to reconsider how we teach, embrace technology to foster student-centered individualized learning, and to break beyond the walls of our classroom and embrace holistic assessment models that reduce our reliance on high-stakes testing. But the greatest opportunity of all is to change the nature of our community conversation. Let's think together about what we want from our schools next year, sure, but strategically and broadly into the future. Let's plan for the bottom up by bringing as many voices into the process as possible instead of a hand-selected few. Let's sit at a table together as peers and treat board members and administrators as merely first among equals. Schools need to teach. School board members must hold administrators accountable and be good fiscal stewards, and listening to parents sustains excellence. I ask for your vote as a voice for the voiceless and a clear endorsement of these principles. But whatever the outcome of the election, at the end, let's come together, embrace everyone, not just the friends of one candidate or another, and recognize that the strongest communities are ones where every voice is heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both candidates for your participation tonight. With those closing remarks, the forum is concluded. I want to thank both of you for helping to promote an informed electorate and embracing a new format in doing so. Voting for Manhasset's Board of Election Trustees and the school budget are by mail-in ballot only, due June 9th. A special thank you to League members Judy Esterquest and Fran Furtado, who led the team figuring out how to run these voter services virtually. Thank you all of the viewers, for actively participating in your community. Remember to mail in your ballot, and have a good night.